Hey everybody, I hope you're having a great day. On the bench today I have a Squire 51 guitar, which I recently picked up used. So we'll give this a look over, make sure it's all in working condition, get it cleaned up. And I also want to talk about the history of this guitar and why I think it's the most important guitar that Fender has put out in the last 30 years. Should be a good one. Stick around. To really understand the importance of this guitar, I think we first have to go back to the mid 1960s, and that's when Fender bought Squire. Now, Squire had been around for a long time, since the late 1800s, and they were a supplier of strings for various instruments, violins and guitars and things like that. Now, when Fender bought them, they used them for the same reason. Squire originally made the strings for the Fender guitars. And eventually they ceased production, and Fender just went to making their own strings, but they retained the rights to Squire. Now, as I've talked about in other videos, around that same time period in the 70s was when it's what's commonly referred to as the lawsuit era in guitars. Now, the lawsuit era I've talked about elsewhere. I'm not going to really go into it in the same vein here, but it came about because people were looking for lower priced versions of their favorite guitars. So at this point in time, Fender was only making American-made guitars. I believe Gibson was still also only making American-made guitars. So people turned to Japan for lower-priced instruments that were good quality, and that's where you'll see a lot of the same designs. You know, Stratocasters, Telecasters, Les Pauls, things like that, coming in from Japan. And that was really to fill that need for the lower priced instruments. So Fender was feeling that pressure, and in the early 80s, they revived the Squire name, but in this instance, it was to build copies of their their flagship guitars at lower quality, lower price, to satisfy that market. As time went along, Squire eventually moved most of their production to other countries: Korea, Indonesia, China was a big one. But the purpose of Squire still remained the same, which was to make lower end models of Fender. At this point in time, Squire had never made its own unique design. And that's where the Squire 51 comes in. So the initial run of these came out in 2004 or late 2003. And they were a uniquely, I say uniquely kind of with quotations, and I'll tell you why in a moment. They were a uniquely Squire offering. Fender wasn't making something like this. So the reason I say it's a uniquely Squire design is because this guitar was modeled after the precision bass that Fender put out in 51. I'll put a picture of that here, and you'll see the similarities. So one of the similarities is this cut-in control plate here, which is not very common on a lot of Fender instruments. And the other one, which you can't see here because the guitar didn't have it, is this large pick guard, which fits around the majority of the upper part of the body and contours in on top of this control plate. You'll see the same thing on the bass. The pickup here on the bass is at the lower point. It contours around it, has a nice design. So that's where the 51 name came from. And as I mentioned, these guitars first started coming out in 2004, late 2003, and were first discontinued in 2007. This guitar became, I won't say it was a hit, because if you look at the sales numbers and the performance of this guitar, I would say by most measures it did not do well. So these originally sold for $149 when they were first introduced, and then by the end of their first lifespan, I think they were discounted to $99. Some places, I think I've seen people saying they got them as low as, $80 brand new from the store. But why I think this is really the most important guitar in Fender's history in the last 30 years is that it was a departure from their normal. They had a lot of Stratocaster designs that were basically the same thing. You have 3 single coils, 3 knobs, 5-way switch. The biggest difference you're going to get is maybe you have a humbucker somewhere. And I'm not going to say that Fender hasn't innovated. They've subtly innovated, I'd say, in their 60 plus, 70 plus years of existence. But for the most part, they just kind of churn the same thing over and over. And hey, to their credit, it's a success. Their guitars are some of, the most well-respected and liked guitars. And there's a reason that everybody wants one. The Stratocaster is an iconic guitar. The Telecaster is an iconic guitar. But they kind of were just doing the same thing over and over. Now, the Squier came out, the Squier 51, and as you can tell right off the bat, it's a different kind of beast. It borrows a lot from a lot of other Fender designs. Obviously, the body is a Stratocaster shape. The neck is a Telecaster shape. And that's consistent with the 51 basses. But it's got a single in the neck, which is pretty common. Humbucker in the bridge, not all that common. It's just a 2 pickup design, also not that common for Fender. And then the electronics, the controls are quite a bit different. So this is the volume knob. It's got a push-pull function, which splits this coil. And then the tone control is not really a tone control. I won't even call it a tone control. This guitar doesn't have one. It's a pickup selector, and it's a 3-position pickup selector. Now this one doesn't work right now. We'll get that fixed. It just jiggles. It doesn't click. It doesn't really work. But it's a 3-position. So furthest clockwise, it's going to be just the bridge, the humbucker. Click it once to the left, it's going to be both, and then all the way counterclockwise, it's just the neck. That's not a common design. I can hardly think of any other Fender guitars that use a pickup selector like this. Now, maybe you say, well, it's not that big of a deal. Whether it's a toggle switch or a selector like this, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, it does the same thing. But the fact that this doesn't have a tone control is pretty unique. The Tom DeLonge Strat comes to mind when I think of guitars that don't have tone controls. So after the initial run of this guitar, Fender actually put one out, which again is something that Fender had not done. Squier wasn't making unique designs, which obviously means that Fender didn't take those designs because they didn't exist, and then make their own. So Fender picked this up, I want to say around 2011, and they built this, basically this exact same guitar with, better parts, obviously, as you would expect. And they made them out of Japan, and they were, I want to say they were around for a couple of years. Again, discontinued. And then Squier brought this guitar back as part of their Vintage Modified series. So the Vintage Modified version of this, honestly, is the exact same thing. I don't think they really made any design changes at all. It's the same guitar. This guitar, I also think, really inspired Fender to look outside the box of what it was doing. Shortly after this guitar was first discontinued, Fender came out with the Pawn Shop series. Now, the Pawn Shop series was inspired, I guess, with the thinking that this is a guitar you might find hanging up in a pawn shop wall. This is a guitar that people swapped parts out. They mishmashed things and made parts casters. They routed out different pickup combinations on their own, and they came up with a unique and different style of instrument. And those guitars, I believe, were, no, someone correct me if I'm wrong, I believe those were only made in Japan. They came out under the Fender line, and I think they had a lot of really unique and great designs. I know those guitars, I've played a couple, were really high quality, really nice instruments. And as far as I can tell, were big successes. And then after that, and more recent, Fender released the Parallel Universe series, and it was really, a different name for the same thing. In some kind of parallel universe, this weird guitar came to be. It has maybe, pickups from a Jazzmaster, and it's got a neck from a Stratocaster, and it's got a body from a Telecaster, and it's got, a pickup configuration of a Les Paul or something, things like that. And again, Fender had that license to go out and try new things because they seen what they had done in the past. Now, earlier I said that these guitars were not successful. And that was really in terms of retail success, I would say. But these guitars represented something that Fender had not yet tapped into, which was, the modification aftermarket type of consumer. As I mentioned earlier, these guitars were originally sold for $150 and eventually were reduced even further and eventually sold about $100 right as they were getting ready to be discontinued. Now, what these guitars were good for was for someone to get into a familiar type of instrument, Stratocaster type stuff, Telecaster type stuff, humbucker single coil. It's a very simple layout. But these were not so expensive that people felt like they were sacred types of instruments. No, you're not going to go spend $400, $500 on a Stratocaster and then cut it to pieces or modify it in a significant way. Yes, modifications exist in that somebody will swap out a pickup, maybe swap out controls. But, if you're talking about taking a router to this and cutting out a different pickup configuration, you're not going to want to do that on your most prized instrument. But for a guitar that's $150, plays good, you know, it's a solid wood, you know, you'd probably go for it. And that's what really sprung up out of this was a modification community, which is still, as far as I can see, pretty active on the internet. You could go search for Squire 51s, and most of the ones that I found have been modified in a lot of different ways. People cut their own pick guards. They've modified the body to accept different pickups. They've put different hardware on it. They've, you know, painted it different colors that were not originally available. You know, they've kind of taken a guitar that, you know, they don't have a lot of skin in that. You know, if they ended up trying to modify something and they broke the guitar forever, you know, that's not a huge deal. You know, they're out 150 bucks maybe, and they could salvage it for parts and use it elsewhere. But the community building aspect of that was really something, and the modding community, I should say, is really something that Fender had not experienced up to that point. All right, I am ready to string this back up. Got everything put back together. Got the issue with the knob sorted out. I just need to be cleaned up a little bit, tightened down. So that's now working the way it's supposed to. I added a shim into the neck to increase the angle here. The reason I wanted to do that is so I could raise up these saddles. On this design here, it feeds down through the bottom of the bridge, goes under and then up and through the saddle here. So just increasing that height will give the string a little bit more room, so it's not you know, adding some weird angles into the string break. But otherwise, I think this is going to end up being pretty good. So get it all wrapped up.